Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Lens of Bias. I'm your host, Kat Killian. Glad to be here after a 2 week hiatus due to COVID. And because of COVID brain, I did the whole show, or most of the show, with realizing that I had not gone live. So I'm glad to be with you here. I'm just going to attribute that to COVID brain. But glad to be here with you today. And so today we're going to talk about skepticism. So, what is a skeptic? Skeptic is someone who will question beliefs. And I love this definition by Sergeant Scholar on Facebook. Skepticism is a driving force toward critical thinking. So if we are skeptics about something, we will look at it and we will look at that critical thinking and we will ask ourselves that question, is it really true? And then we will look for evidence which may prove it or disprove it. The key is to stay in that kind of zone where you're saying is, I might have a bias on this already, but I'm going to look at the evidence and see where the evidence takes me. Now, there is something that is called fake skepticism. And I see that is more of a way that moves towards biased thinking. So you come across something that confronts your bias. So it says, let's say, for example, the economy does poorly under Democrats and it's very strong under Republicans. And then something happens in that, and your bias will say, "Well, wait a minute, the economy's doing well under Democrats," and you can't believe that because you already have that bias. So you might look at that evidence and, well, that's wrong, or that's an anomaly, or that's something else that somebody else did and is the result of that. So you're looking towards preserving your own biased thinking rather than looking at how how that evidence might change your thinking. And that is really the key to being a true skeptic. It's incorporates a willingness to adjust your belief or your doubt about something, despite your preferences, despite your own biases. And that awareness of your bias is really important in being a true skeptic. So I do want to talk about something that's been pretty controversial today. And I'm going to start by admitting it's about the film called Sound of Freedom. And I'm sure many of you have heard of it, and you may have heard of the biases on both sides concerning this film. I have not watched the film. I have read much of the commentary because I'm trying to understand why is it controversial. And I do know that only part of that is, whether or not I see that movie. Because movies tell a story. That's their purpose. It's not painting an entire picture. It's eliminating things that may contradict the story that you're trying to tell. And before I get into that, I'll say a little bit about stories that we tell ourselves. I've been doing some reading into brain research, and it's been pretty fascinating. And our left brain is often the part of our brain that will tell stories. It's where that constant chatter takes place. It's where we take certain things that we see, that we observe, and based on our biases, based on our previous experience, based on our understanding, we take that and we interpret that. So our brain is telling us a story that this is what's going on. Oftentimes, that's very helpful in order to deal with things that are going through every day of life. But when you're talking about these controversial kinds of things, we often have to engage that inner skeptic. So this movie is basically concerning about based on a true story. I'm going to say based on a true story of a man who was involved in human trafficking, I believe, in the Department of Homeland Security, and he got a little bit fed up with the bureaucracy, and he left to continue this work by founding an organization with the abbreviation OUR. OUR. And it goes in, and from what I understand, they style themselves as a paramilitary organization that goes in, rescues people in human trafficking situations, and gets them out of that. Now, part of the controversy has been related to some of the stuff that's been going on politically in our society concerning the story of human trafficking, and that there's a cabal of people. You've heard of Pizzagate and the QAnon conspiracies, that people are trafficking children specifically, and this is where my skeptic just goes crazy for drinking their blood and getting something called adrenochrome or some of that effect. And it just sounds really weird because every single person that I'm aware of that I have interacted with in my life, um, as far as I know, gotta put that little skepticism in there, thinks human trafficking is bad. I think the overwhelming majority of people in this country, in the world, think that human trafficking is bad, and would not willingly participate in it, um, would condemn it. Many times, I've given financial support to organizations who I think are doing really good work to assist with all of the situations, which is not just getting people out of human trafficking situations, but also providing the support to the readjusting to society, healthcare, education, mental health services, uh, those kinds of things. I think we can all agree that those are so important, and that we can easily condemn anyone who would be involved in human trafficking in any form. So my inner skeptic and my belief, and maybe this is a bias of mine, would say no, that can't be true. That's just too outrageous. So my inner skeptic will say, well, okay, let's look at the human trafficking statistics that we know. So I know a lot of stuff about, well, I shouldn't say I know a lot of stuff about, I know some things about human trafficking. A lot of times it's portrayed only as trafficking for sex. And actually, there's different kinds of human trafficking. There's a lot of human trafficking for labor, where people are uh, trafficked. They want to come, let's say, to the United States. They get somebody and they're forced to work off their debt, which is certainly a lot more than what it actually costs to get them there. And then they're forced to stay in that situation, and they can't escape it. Sometimes maybe for physical reasons or for psychological reasons. They could be going out in their community, but they better be at their workstation at a certain time. Otherwise, the people who are illegally trafficking them and keeping them in that situation will go and find them and commit violence against them in order to keep everybody else in line. That's just one thing. I mean, sex trafficking is a huge thing. A lot of times, women will get involved in it, or even children, like runaways. They will get involved in it because they feel like they have no choice, um, and then they get involved with someone who will offer them protection for, you know, doing their. So they have to go out and earn their protection money, or earn their protection. So there's all kinds of human trafficking that go on. It's not just people are kidnapped and brought over international borders, or things like that. So back to this movie, just to kind of get that. So this guy comes in and he's got this organization, and it's kind of a paramilitary organization, and they go in and they rescue kids. Sounds great, sounds wonderful, sounds noble. Um, but as I dug more into some of the stuff with the organization, I found out there's some things kind of going on there. One of the first things that is said is that it styles itself as paramilitary, and there are some people who are ex-military who are involved in it, but there's also some other things going on, and they're not very on times very well organized. There have been accusations where they have encouraged the trafficking. Oh, well, we want younger. They'll go to somebody who's trafficking people, and it's like they're offered women or young men, and they're said, no, we want younger. And so it kind of forces them to go and find younger people, often children, in order to satisfy that need, but it's really to set them up. So that's one of the tactics that this organization has been accused of using, in order to achieve their aims. A journalist was invited to go with them. I read the article, and she was told initially to wait outside because they're going in with guns, and she was like okay with that to find out the aftermath. And then they're telling her to come in, and she's like, I haven't been trained to this. And it was kind of a crazy situation. It was very loose. People didn't really know what they were doing, and she felt very unsafe. And she wrote about her experience with them. Um, and then there's the money. My inner skeptic will always ask me, how are these organizations funded, and who's funding them, and what are they doing with the money? Oftentimes, when I look at charities, I will look and I will say, where is that money going? How is it being used? I believe people who work for nonprofits should be making a reasonable salary, um, commensurate with their experience, and the value that they would get in the private sector for that same kind of work, administrative work, whatever. People shouldn't necessarily, nonprofits don't mean for free, give your labor for free, because we all have to live and work. However, when a nonprofit takes in a certain amount of money, you expect there to be a good breakdown of where that, salaries, operational expenses, you know, and then there might be a prudent reserve for things that may come up. You may need to update your buildings, you may have to put things on reserve for taxes, you know, those kinds of things you have to be aware of. Well, this organization, when I looked at the funds, their funds, the amount of money they took in, greatly exceeded their operational expenses. And so that leads me to believe, well, what's happening to the extra funds? And according to what I've seen is there hasn't really been an accounting of that. So that's where things happen, where uh, abuse of nonprofit status tends to take place, and we've seen that happen time and time again. And again, I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, because I don't know. I don't have the evidence, so I want to make that perfectly clear. But it raises flags. It's something to say like, huh, what's going on here? Why are you raising all this money, and why is it not being used for these purposes? Where is it being used? Um, and so looking at it, that movies tell a story. We don't have the whole picture. So my inner skeptic says I should look at this and see how much of this story is true. Perhaps the details of the particular rescues in there are true, but is it the greater overall arching story that it's trying to tell is government is incompetent? And that was my takeaway from the reviews. And so this man had to go in outside of the system to take care of this problem. I read every day, pretty much, at least several times a week, about people who are rescued from human trafficking situations, and it's mostly by law enforcement. And I commend those people who do that work. And it's good work, and it's work that we need to continue and be aware. I also commend those people who work in those mental health services, and uh, and helping people with education to overcome the trauma of that experience of being trafficked, whether it is as a uh, uh, sexual human trafficking or labor human trafficking or other kinds. Um, and we can't put aside the good work that other people do and other organizations do, including our government. That's my skeptic. Of course, my skeptic also says is that we should look, and those organizations need to have an accounting, especially the government organizations, because those are being funded by our taxpayer money, and so we should have an accounting of what's being done there. Now, we don't need to know all the operational details, but we should know we've spent X amount of dollars here on this, we've deployed this many people, this is generally how we're doing it, and these are the results. So that's just one example of something that's going on today in this world, concerning where healthy skepticism can help you determine, uh, again, not the movie, but when you're based on a true story, uh, the validity of it. And a thought just occurred to me. I don't know if any of you watched the movie Father Stew. Um, and that was a very interesting movie, and it was portrayed, um, very much in a biased way. It looked as if Father Stew before then was uneducated, and I had to go back and I had to read about him, because I was just like, I couldn't believe how an uneducated man could go to seminary, even though he had this devotion, in this day and age. And actually, I come to find out that he was actually educated, um, and so that story changed the narrative a little bit. So when I learned that fact about Father Stew, it changed the narrative of the story. Now, was it based on a true story of Father Stew's life? Absolutely. Were there creative licenses taken in order to tell the story and make it more relatable? Absolutely. From my understanding. Again, my skeptic goes in there and looks at this. So when you watch movies based on a true story, how much of it is based on the true story? Where has artistic license, um, been taken? Engage your inner skeptic when you see something. Is that really true? And be willing to change your bias. Now, this sounds pretty weird. If someone can provide me with concrete evidence, I'm not just talking about speculation, that there is a cabal of people trafficking humans for the purpose of drinking their blood, as gross and disgusting as it sounds, and as much as I do not want to believe that is happening, if you can provide me evidence of that happening in a, like I said, a cabal, not just isolated incidents of some weird sickos, I'd be open to change my bias of that, honestly, and that would really turn my stomach, in my faith in humanity. But I'm willing to do that. But again, it's got to be solid evidence, not just accusations, not just you know coincidence after coincidence that you're tying together in some kind of weird thing. No, I mean, I'm like catching them in the act kind of thing. So that's the level of my skepticism of that I would need hard evidence, absolute proof that it is happening, in order to change that bias of mine. So excuse me, my little COVID cough is kicking in. So I thank you for tuning in today, and I hope to see you next week on another episode of Breaking Lines of Bias. Till then, bye.